All right, there, econ friends. Welcome back to our final video on monopoly. In this video, we're going to talk about a really important and increasingly common practice known as price discrimination. Price discrimination, we'll get into it in some detail. Know that I'm bringing it up in the monopoly lecture, but that price discrimination actually applies in all of our imperfectly competitive structures. In other words, you'll see price discrimination anytime firms have a bit of market power. So technically speaking, you can see price discrimination in monopoly markets, you can see it in monopolistic competition, and you can see it in oligopoly, okay, which we'll discuss later. That's price discrimination. The only place where you do not really see it is in perfect competition, for reasons that'll become clear in a bit. So it's an increasingly common practice. It's a really big part of business strategy, and we'll discuss it in some detail. But just to kind of set the stage, even though I'm bringing this up in our monopoly segment, in fact, price discrimination can occur in other market structures, provided that a few conditions are met. With that said, let's jump in. So price discrimination, what is it? Well, price discrimination is defined as a business strategy of maximizing profits, and here's the key, by essentially selling the same product to different customers at different prices. Sounds pretty simple, but it's pretty profound, okay? Price discrimination, this is what we're talking about. First of all, it's a business strategy. It's an intentional strategy, and it's a business strategy designed to maximize profits. And it occurs when basically a firm sells essentially the same product to different consumers at different prices. Seen another way, price discrimination means that you charge different customers different prices for the same thing. Now, this is new because so far in our discussion of PC and in our previous discussion of monopoly, we were operating under the assumption that the firm sold its product at one single price. We learned the MR equals MC rule, we applied it to get the price, and we assumed that the firm, both the competitive one and the monopoly one, that they sold all their products at a single price. However, in the real world, some firms have the ability to charge higher prices to consumers who they perceive as being more willing to pay, and to charge lower prices to those who they believe are less willing to pay. Notice here that we're talking a little bit about elasticity. You'll recall from earlier lectures that elasticity reflected your price sensitivity, okay? But ultimately, price discrimination can occur whenever a firm is able to charge a higher price to a consumer who they think is more willing to pay, and to lower the price and charge that lower price to consumers who might be less willing to pay. Note that since changing the price generally does not change a firm's costs, okay, recall that profit is equal to total revenue minus total cost. Since changing prices will typically not change the firm's costs, if a firm can successfully practice price discrimination, it can increase its total revenues and therefore critically increase its profits. So it's fundamentally a business strategy decision. The firm has to achieve this, however, or the firm can only achieve this, however, if it can do and achieve several conditions, okay? So to do price discrimination, what do you have to be able to enforce or achieve or do? And there's a couple of conditions. Condition number one In order to price discriminate, the firms have to have some market power. Since you're going to charge different prices, you have to have some price setting ability, and therefore you have to have some market power. So condition number one, to price discriminate, a firm has to have market power. Note that discrimination is going to be a lot less likely as the industries grow bigger and the number of firms grow bigger and the level of competition increases. It's just much harder to do, okay? The second condition, firms must have some ability to differentiate their buyers. We set up here that elasticity was sort of a key component to price discrimination. Recall that elasticity reflects your sensitivity to price changes. We said here that a firm will probably charge a higher price to a consumer who's willing to pay more. In other words, to a consumer who is less price sensitive, less price elastic, or more inelastic. On the flip side, firms will probably charge lower prices to those who are less willing to pay. So they're going to charge lower prices if you are more price sensitive or more price elastic. So elasticity is key, and therefore the second condition, the firm has to have some ability to differentiate the buyers. In other words, for all of you marketing majors, the firm has to be able to practice what is known as market segmentation, taking this big group of customers and slicing and dicing them into different segments with different buying characteristics, different demand characteristics, and different elasticities. Okay, again, price discrimination requires that consumers differ in their sensitivity to price. In other words, they must have different elasticities of demand. And in turn, the firm has to be able to understand and discern those differences so that they can decide, I'm going to charge this segment more, this segment less. Giving you a little graph right here. Notice in panel A, we're talking more price elastic, okay, more sensitive to price changes. And in panel B, less price elastic. Notice that here where it's more elastic in panel A, we see a flatter demand curve. That's a little bit farther in because they're more price sensitive. Notice that over here, the less price elastic, the less price sensitive, the more inelastic, we're going to have a steeper demand curve, and it's going to be pushed a bit farther out. Okay, so both the slope and the position of those demand curves, they represent the buyer's elasticity. You then see a corresponding MR curve underneath it. And if we simply do our old MR equals MC analysis, and we go up and over, MR is MC, up and over, it's pretty clear from the graph. It's also super intuitive to you, but it's pretty clear that if you have more price elastic, more sensitive, you're going to charge a lower price. Less price elastic, more willing to pay, you're going to charge a higher price. Okay, so you can see this on the graphs. You can also just think about it intuitively as well. And the third criteria, the third condition, is that firms must have some ability to prevent resale. In other words, to prevent what we call in economic theory and in finance theory, arbitrage. Arbitrage is defined as the process where you buy a good in one market and then you turn around and you immediately resell the same good in a different market at a higher price with basically no risk. Okay, arbitrage, again, buying something cheap in one market, turning around immediately, selling it at a higher price in a different market with very little risk taken on. Well, you can imagine from your knowledge of supply and demand and equilibrium that basically if you have easy reselling or easy arbitrage, price differences quickly erode. And therefore, to cap this off, any firm that wishes to price discriminate has to find ways to make it really tough to resell products. Because again, if I can easily buy it cheap in one market and sell it high in another market, those price differences will very quickly be eliminated. The gaps will be eliminated and the price discrimination ends. So it's really important that firms have an ability to prevent resale. Once you think about this, a lot of stuff that you see in the real world makes sense. Airlines, for example, don't allow you to transfer tickets to other people. Why? Well, because airlines practice price discrimination. They charge some consumers cheaper fares and other consumers higher fares. And if you were allowed to simply transfer your ticket to somebody else with no penalty, you can buy a lot of ones at low prices and give them to higher priced people. That would wipe out the discrimination for the airline. Think about textbooks. You guys probably see after every semester, some of the books that you own become obsolete because they have this new edition. You know, we all know that the new edition textbooks generally don't have much new content. Why then would textbook manufacturers want to have new editions all the time? Well, in large part because they know that if they can get professors to tell you, hey, you students need the newest edition, you're unable to buy a cheaper previous edition and resell it to a student who's taking my class. Say, nope, I'm not going to accept those old editions. You need the newest edition. Well, that's basically a way for textbook manufacturers to lock in the new versions and to prevent resale or textbook arbitrage. Okay. There's a lot of other examples in the real world about the prevention of this. And once you understand how it operates, you see this stuff all over the place. And we'll discuss more examples in our live lectures. But anyway, there's 3 conditions that must be met. If a firm can achieve these 3, it can price discriminate. And what we're seeing increasingly is that more and more businesses are doing this, more and more industries are doing it, and they're becoming increasingly sophisticated in how they do it. Note that it's helped along in large part by you guys when you search for things online and the fact that technology tracks your searches and tracks your histories. All of those things provide information to sellers about your relative elasticities and desire for goods. So it's becoming really common and really, really sophisticated. How are some ways that we do it? Not we, that firms do it. Well, a very common one, price discrimination by age. A 12-year-old gets a cheaper meal at a restaurant than an adult. A senior citizen also gets a cheaper meal than an adult, than a non-senior citizen adult. Okay, restaurants have different menus, same food based on age. Senior citizens get lots of discounts everywhere, so do kids. Sometimes you guys as college students get discounts. Okay, offering of sales or specials or coupons is a really effective way to price discriminate. If you take one person who's fairly wealthy and one who's not as wealthy, I'm making up these broad examples, the person who's not as wealthy will be inclined to clip coupons to get a discount. Well, this is a way to show who has more elasticity. So we see it there. Pricing by location, a really common way to price discriminate. You take a look even by our campus within the city, different gas stations, even a couple blocks apart, big differences in gas prices. So lots of price discrimination by location. We see it in the selling of branded and generic items, especially in medications and other products. You have branded items and generic items, essentially the same thing, but being sold at different prices. We see some retailers giving quantity discounts. If you buy 10 or more, we'll charge you less. Notice that this is a way to segment business buyers from personal buyers. And you also see bundling, which is a way to offer different buyers these different tiers of service. This is a real simple list. The examples are increasingly common in the economy because this is becoming, again, very common, and firms are getting really sophisticated at segmenting customers to do it. Besides the ways that they do it, what are some common examples? Well, I can think of a handful offhand that you guys as college students experience. Common examples of price discrimination include airline tickets. You ever fly somewhere, assuming that we can never take vacations again, right? You fly home for something, you fly somewhere else for a vacation, look around the plane. There's a very good chance that you as a college student are paying a different price than a lot of other people on the plane. Same journey, same tube, same bad food, same pain in the ass kid kicking your chair, but you're paying different prices for that privilege. You see this in movie ticket prices. If you guys take your ID to a theater, you're going to get a college student discount on a movie ticket. I won't. Okay, different characteristics, different buying elasticities, different prices charged. And the most common one that you guys see, or maybe you don't see, but you should see, university tuition. Significant price discrimination is practiced by all universities. Because I guarantee that if you guys were to ask around and compare your tuition to those of your classmates, you would see that probably none of you are paying the same amount. You're all getting this awesome lecture from this handsome, good-looking professor, joke, right? But think about that. You all take the same classes, you get the same lectures, you get the same diplomas. Some of you are paying full tuition. Some of you are getting a full ride. Some of you are in the middle. Same product, thrilling econ lecture, different prices that you're paying. So you guys as college students are not immune to this. There are many common examples of price discrimination that you guys are also a part of. And again, note that as firms increasingly can track your economic activity, as they can track your searches, as Amazon is able to capture what you look for, the firms very quickly get a sense of what you're interested in, and they can make educated guesses on your different elasticities. And therefore, you can expect that price discrimination will probably get more common in your futures. So with that said, is that a good or a bad thing? And this is a very interesting issue. There's clearly moral and ethical and fairness issues tied to this, but that's really beyond the scope of this course. It's worth talking about, but that's beyond the scope of a pure economics discussion. But what's really important to point out is this. It's very clear that price discrimination is going to be beneficial to the firms that can do it. They're going to sell more products. They're going to generate more total revenue. They're going to generate higher profits. So there's clearly economic incentive for firms to do it. But I want to point something out to you and maybe challenge you to think about this, that while price discrimination is definitely good for the firm, it can also be good for society. Interesting. It's definitely good for the firm, but it can also be good for society, because at its core, if price discrimination is done well, it will increase the welfare of society by increasing the number of people who can buy a product. Remember that dead weight loss is the condition that arises when not everybody who is willing and able to buy the product can get it. If there is an artificially or an abnormally low amount of consumption, you get that dead weight loss triangle. We know that monopolies have this triangle. We learned it in earlier lectures, because when you look at what the PC firm would provide and what the monopoly firm would provide, monopoly offers less for sale. They sell less at higher prices. They have a dead weight loss. But note that price discrimination actually increases the number of people who can buy a product. So price discrimination can increase society welfare. In other words, it can reduce dead weight loss, okay? In other words, the more effectively a firm can practice price discrimination, the more its actions will, as I just said, reduce dead weight loss and in turn, increase economic efficiency. And as one way to illustrate this, let's wrap up this lecture by looking at a really simple chart. Panel A, panel B. In panel A, we're taking the traditional, what we're going to call single price monopolist. They charge one price. And in panel B, we'll take the price discriminator monopolist, who in this case will charge three prices. Notice over here in panel A, our rules apply. We set MR equal to MC. We end here. We get a quantity of 200. We go up. We go over. We get a price of 3. And clearly, as you learned earlier, we've got a really, really big dead weight loss triangle. But notice if instead we're over here in panel B. This implies that the monopolist is able to determine what individual consumers are willing to pay. So notice here that the monopolist charges $2 to some customers and $3 to other customers and $4 to more customers. By being able to charge different prices, the discriminating monopolist is able to actually sell 300 items. Very counterintuitive. But think about this. Let's go back here to the single price monopolist. He set the Q at 200 and the P at 3. This meant that any consumers who were willing and able to pay $2 were out of luck. Hey, Mr. Monopolist, I'm willing to pay $2. Monopolist says, tough shit. The price is $3. You're out of the market. You can't take part. You're part of the dead weight loss. But over here, with the price discriminator, he'll sell some customers the item at 4 if they're willing to pay for it, and others at 3 if they're willing to pay 3. And even the customer willing to pay 2, they can still get it. So instead of only selling 200 units, we sell 300 units. And if you map this out, you see that the dead weight loss triangle is much smaller. And in fact, if you were to have a situation, which is very rare economically, but of what we called perfect price discrimination, in other words, if the monopolist was able to determine what each and every single customer was willing to pay and charge that customer the exact perfect price that they're willing to pay, we would actually get rid of all dead weight loss. Not bad. Counterintuitive. Because when you hear about this, you think, oh, this is a way for firms to make more money. It's good for them. It's probably bad for society and consumers. But this is one of those cases where economics can trick you. And if you think about it rationally, and especially if you take advantage of the power of our graphs and of our basic concepts, you can see that a firm that can do good price discrimination, not only will they make more money, but they will also increase overall efficiency by reducing dead weight loss from this really big one to a much smaller one. And in the case of perfect price discrimination, eliminating dead weight loss totally. That, my friends, is our wrap up of price discrimination. I wanted to give you a brief overview of it in our monopoly segment because it's a good place to put it. But know again that this can be done by any firm with market power. It's really important that you understand how this works because it is getting increasingly common. Firms are getting increasingly sophisticated. And I think that increasingly we're going to see in our economy lots of different prices for the same item based on this. Thanks for your time. Congrats on wrapping up Monopoly, and I'll see you next time.